You know, I did computer science about ages ago, and you know, it's a 4-year degree. It was tough, and then when I ended it, you know, I was looking for a job, and at the time, you know, I looked at job description, and it was like looking for a Java developer, you know, with 10 years experience. But at the time, Java was only out for 5.
Yeah.
And this is a true story. And you know, so this is something that's close to my heart, right? A lot of people have you know, experience you know, similar things. So when I got introduced to Will, you know, we kind of strike a conversation. We start talking about the particular topics, and he does really interesting stuff around helping enterprise and large organizations streamline and make their hiring more efficient. So Will, maybe I'll turn it to you just to give us a kind of a background.
Sure. Sounds great. Well, thank you again for inviting me, David. Really excited to be able to talk to this group of people, and just to give you a quick overview of who I am, who Burning Glass is. So Burning Glass is a labor market analytics company. We use proprietary data sets from both resumes and online social profiles, as well as online job descriptions, to understand what are the jobs and skills that are most demanded in the workforce today, and how has that been trending over time. And one of the fields that we focus on the most is cybersecurity, because it's one of the most rapidly evolving fields in the workforce at all. It's also one of the most important fields, because you don't have enough people to secure our digital resources, then we have no semblance of privacy anymore. And so you know, we've spent a lot of time focusing on that field, using some of our proprietary data sets, and we've released a number of reports, as well as built a tool called cyberseek.org that provides supply and demand information about the cybersecurity workforce for anybody who's trying to understand what job opportunities look like in the field.
So what I found about the space, in particular, and I've been doing this for a while, so I have a day job, contrary to the common belief. And what I've seen is that the whole space is accelerating. Some of the technologies that are, you know, come about, you know, if you know, firewalls was a thing for 10 years, you know, that space of time where new technology is being introduced to enterprises is getting shorter and shorter. What do you see are some trends in terms of you know, skill set, in terms of hiring?
Yeah, so cybersecurity is one of the most interesting fields, I think, to look at when you look at the skill evolution of the field, because you're really seeing a growth both in the breadth and the depth of the skill sets that are required in the field, and where those skill sets are being required within an organization. So what I mean by breadth is that cybersecurity skills, they're no longer just housed within a traditional cybersecurity team, or even just within the IT team. They're enterprise-wide, and that means that everybody within an organization across, and regardless of their role, needs some foundational cybersecurity literacy. And that obviously presents challenges for organizations who now need workers who could be admins or business analysts and everything in between, who now need some foundational knowledge of the field in order to secure the entire organization. And then in terms of the depth, we're seeing, I think, increased specialization within the field around specific new technologies. I think, you know, by definition, pretty much every new technology is going to have a cybersecurity component, certainly any digital technology. And so that means that there's going to be a constant influx of new technologies that have to be paired with cybersecurity expertise if you're going to secure those new technologies and secure your organization if you're using those technologies. And so I think three of the areas where we've really seen the most rapid growth lately in terms of either new technologies or just new skill sets that are spreading into the field are one, new technologies related to just the proliferation of devices, so things like IoT security, things like cloud security, although maybe the two vendors have figured that one out, who we heard from earlier today. But you know, anything associated with just this rapid proliferation of devices and some of the security challenges associated with securing that increased network is one area. I've also seen a rapid increase in demand for automation-related skill sets and technologies. So you know, that could even be just more cybersecurity workers who know Python, can write scripts. to automate simple processes. It can be understanding of orchestration tools. It could be knowledge of Splunk. And it can, and so that's definitely a place where we're seeing a lot of investment as employers are trying to figure out, if we don't have enough workers, how do we automate as many processes as possible with the workers we do have to lessen some of the burden on our team. And then the third place is risk management. We've seen risk management and risk management frameworks, things like the NIST, CSF, grow tremendously in demand across sectors. And so organizations are increasingly moving away from just a compliance-based, check-off-the-box approach to cybersecurity and really investing more heavily in risk management-related skill sets. And they're asking all of their employees across the cybersecurity team and beyond to have some foundational understanding of different risk management frameworks and approaches so that they can apply those principles to the work they do in cybersecurity.
So since it's a bit of a moving target, let's say if somebody's working right now in application security and they're looking to catch up to the next hottest trend. And the idea again is, I'm sure there's some people here that would like to combine their passion in terms of what they like to do, but also make decent living. And so what do you suggest to somebody that is trying to predict the future and have like this kind of a crystal ball in terms of what to look for next? Because it takes time. Yep. It takes a couple of years to become proficient in anything.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's always to the best of your ability, try to skate where the puck is going. But then, how do you know where the puck is going? And one of the things that I would recommend people look at is try to understand how do technologies seem to be evolving within a particular space. Maybe it's not a technology that anybody's talking about has security implications yet, but in the near term, it probably will. Or maybe people are just starting to talk about it now. So a great example might be automotive security. I think increasingly people are talking about that, but if you had looked at the self-driving trend maybe 2 years ago, and you were one of the first people to start thinking about what are the some of the security implications of that new technology, you could be on the ground floor as organizations are trying to figure out how do we secure these autonomous vehicles that we're developing, and you have a very in-demand skill set. Even now, we still see significant salary premiums for things like cloud security, for things like, excuse me, some of the automation technologies I talked about. So people who have skill sets related to automation in cybersecurity, on average, they command a salary premium of somewhere on the order of $20,000 to $25,000 over other cybersecurity workers. Similarly for cloud.
You're talking about per year, right?
Per year, yeah, per year. And that's really just adding one additional skill set to your portfolio. If you add cloud security, if you add automation-related security expertise, you can see a very significant salary bump when you go and apply for more jobs. And so being able to understand what are those new technologies and what are the implications for security, I think is a good guide as you try to figure out what are the types of skill sets you could be adding to your portfolio in order to see a significant salary bump and kind of ride the wave of innovation within cybersecurity.
Right. So the next topic I'd like to talk about is and it's always on the news, like the shortage, right? Now, again, talking from my experience, when I saw these, I was a new graduate, with not a lot of experience, and we were talking about back in the day, 1 million unfulfilled, cybersecurity jobs, and then I realized that, the reason why it's a shortage is because, the requirements are, okay, you need to know, 2 scripting languages, you need to do a 24/7 job and rotation, and you need to lift 100 pounds. But no, it's no joke. And then guess what? You only be making $20 an hour, right? So therefore, there were unfulfilled jobs just like that. And I think also the same thing here. You see a lot of unfulfilled jobs in New York City. Reason being, it's so expensive to live here. So making $150,000 or $175,000 does not take you a long way. When latte is frappuccino is $15, right? So it's almost like the example of and I'll finish with that is the kitchen is not too small. It's just how much the house costs. The kitchen is small for that amount, And so, I think if you pay enough, all those jobs are going to get fulfilled. It's just that right now, these people are they're not available because there's nobody who is willing to pay. So what's your take on it? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And taking a step back, I think everybody hears people talking about the talent shortage in cybersecurity, and I think most people in the field feel it. They feel a pinch. Although I've heard some people say, "Well, is it really as bad as everybody says?" And so we try to look for quantifiable evidence of a talent shortage in cybersecurity. And there are really a few different factors that lead us to conclude it's definitely one of the tightest markets in the country. The first is if you look at the average time to fill for these jobs. Consistently, cybersecurity jobs are remaining open longer than other IT jobs. Somewhere in the order of at least 15 to 20% longer on average. IT jobs are already usually harder to fill than most jobs. So
when you say 15, 20%, give us just an idea, like numbers. How long does it take? It takes like a week, 2 weeks, a month?
It can be minimum of an extra week. Sometimes it can be extra few weeks depending on the role. Even looking at certain types of skill sets that are hard to fill, like cloud security, that can increase it by months to fill, not just days or weeks. And so there's definitely evidence that it takes much longer for employers to fill those jobs. We also see that just by virtue of the increasing salaries, that's a sign that employers are struggling to fill those jobs. They have to pay more. That doesn't mean they're always paying enough, but they are definitely increasing their salaries in response to that hiring difficulty. And then the last piece is just looking at how many workers there currently are relative to how many job openings there are. And so if we're already in a tight market across the entire economy, but if the cybersecurity workforce was going to have enough employed workers to just be in line with the market average, then you would need the entire cybersecurity workforce to grow 2.5 times overnight, just for there to be a supply and demand ratio similar to what we see across all jobs. So we definitely see strong evidence that hiring is much tighter in cybersecurity. That said, we also see strong evidence that employers are not always making it easier on themselves, to your point. You raised the example earlier of somebody asking for Java and 10 years of experience when Java was only 5 years old. We see evidence of employers asking for CISSP, full CISSP certification, which takes minimum of 5 years previous work experience, and they say, and we want you to have no more than 2 years of previous work experience. So they have no idea what they're asking for in some cases, and it's not that the hiring manager doesn't know what to ask for. A hiring manager, a CISO, they're usually going to know what a CISSP is and that you can't have a CISSP and only 2 years of previous work experience. HR doesn't know that. And so HR thinks, we hear that CISSP is an important certification. We should probably tack that onto our job descriptions for entry-level information security analysts. And then they're inadvertently making it impossible to fill that job. And it's not just certifications. We see similar things around education and experience. Employers are consistently asking for heightened education requirements, minimum of a bachelor's for many jobs. They're consistently asking for minimum of 3 to 5 previous years of work experience. And on the one hand, that seems logical. If you want somebody to protect your digital assets, you want somebody who knows how to protect your digital assets and isn't a green kid out of college. But if you have no fresh blood coming into the industry, then you have no talent pipeline. And you have no way of replacing the workers who retire, replacing the workers who leave for greener pastures elsewhere. And then over time, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. And so, we generally try to help employers understand what are the nice-to-have credentials and what are the need-to-have credentials. And if something is just a nice-to-have credential and it's going to considerably constrain your pool of talent that you could be recruiting from, then you're probably better off leaving it out of your job description. And if it's something you can train up a worker in, train them in it, build that talent. Don't just try to buy it and look for that proverbial purple unicorn that doesn't exist.
Right. So it's funny, I did the CISSP years and years ago when it wasn't even a thing. And at the time, employers didn't even ask for it. And we had a CISO that I interviewed here on this meetup, and they said they don't actually care about certifications. and or applicable education. I think they specifically have a music degree. A quick question about maybe the differentiator between industries in terms of requirements. Again, from my experience, I've seen some employers want a specific domain knowledge. Would that be something that you've seen as well?
That's absolutely something we've seen, and it's interesting you raise that because it relates back to, I think, some of the hiring difficulty that employers feel is that there are definitely industry-wide trends, but then there are industry-specific trends that are different for cybersecurity teams in the energy industry versus finance versus retail, et cetera. Often when cybersecurity jobs, they're already what we call hybrid jobs, and that means a job that pulls from skill sets from multiple domains. Cybersecurity jobs are kind of the quintessential hybrid jobs to begin with. And then when you pair that with domain expertise in a particular industry, both understanding of the business, but then also understanding if you're in a heavily regulated industry, what are the regulations that are applicable to you, then you're taking an already hybridized role with many different skill sets and compounding the set of competencies that are required and making it much harder as a result to find somebody who knows networking skills, cryptography, and what was that? Domain expertise, and dozens of other competencies that are being requested in that role. Another piece to the differences across industries, which I think ties back also to what we were talking about when we were focusing on certifications, is that I think a lot of the demand for things like CISSP is actually driven by what employers see professional services firms doing, so MSPs, MSSPs. Those are kind of concentrators of cybersecurity talent. They hire as many people as they can. They pay them higher salaries than what you can see in other industries or what they could get in other industries. And then they have a vested interest in hiring workers who have those credentials because they look sexy when you say, hey, I have 10 CISSPs on staff ready to work for you. And then other industries, they say, well, if we're going to hire somebody, we're outsourcing to this company that has a bunch of CISSPs. We want a CISSP in-house. And I think that compounds some of the misperception of, at least among HR teams, that they should be looking for these credentials because that's what the contractors they work with have. And so I think that in addition to just the differences in skill requirements across industries, that kind of the emphasis that a lot of professional services firms place on those credentials then has a trickle-down effect throughout all the other industries that often we see following the professional services firms in terms of skill sets that they're hiring for.
So, my experience is that, again, the domain expertise is sometimes something that's unique. I worked with a healthcare provider where the IT manager director is also responsible for security, was a nurse for about 10, 12 years prior to getting into IT. So they know the business inside out. So your firm specifically assists companies streamline and I guess make the hiring process more efficient, right, and save them money in the end, right? So there's two sides of the question. Is how do you do that today? And then you quantify that, right? There's a lot of quantitative approach to that. And then secondly, what do you recommend for someone who's on the other side is trying to get hired? How would they kind of fit themselves into that mold and become more attractive to employers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And really what we try to do when we work with organizations or when we make recommendations to individuals is as a starting point, say, try to take an inventory of the skill sets that are most important to focus on. If you're an organization, that means don't just think about your cybersecurity workforce in terms of headcount of how many cybersecurity engineers and analysts do you have, but think about the underlying skill sets that those workers need and that your team more broadly needs in order to secure your organization. And then once you've been able to take that inventory at the skill level, you're able to then figure out what are those skill sets that are most important and are hardest to fill. And in many cases, organizations find that they can create more more effective or optimized job descriptions by pruning out some of the skill sets that are just going to be really too expensive to find on the spot market for talent, and then finding ways to train workers they are either already have or workers that they hire from outside the company in those hard-to-find skill sets. So for quantifiable example, if you're working with, if you're trying to hire a network engineer, the average salary for a network engineer on average is somewhere in the order of $90,000 to $100,000. The average salary for a network engineer with cloud security skills is on the order of $120,000. That one skill increases the salary or the cost to fill somebody by $20,000 to $25,000. It doesn't take $20,000 to $25,000 to train someone in cloud security. You can send them to Cybrary or Cloud Guru or another training provider, and they can pick up those skills. And they're probably going to appreciate that you're investing in their professional development, and it's going to help with retention as well. And so, we advise companies to try to pinpoint those skill sets that are going to be most important, but also hardest to fill and most expensive to fill, and then figure out whether or not they can get a better ROI by investing in workers to develop those skills internally. Another thing that defining your roles in terms of skills allows you to do is build out career pathways between different roles within your organization that are skill adjacent to cybersecurity jobs. And that can dramatically broaden the pool of talent that you're pulling from, either internal to your organization or externally to your organization. So, for example, if you have a cybersecurity analyst position you're trying to fill, and you realize, well, we're having a really hard time filling it, but if we hire somebody who comes from a networking background, they usually have 80 or 90% of the skill sets necessary to perform this role within our organization. They're probably going to come in at a lower price point in many cases as well. Then we can train them up on the last mile skills they need to make that transition. Then you're going to dramatically expand your pool of talent you're recruiting from. You also can help with retention if you're promoting people internally, because they are more likely to want to stick with a company that gives them opportunities and room to grow and consistent advancement potential. And so it can really be a win-win to build out those pathways between skill-adjacent roles within an organization. And the last thing I'll say too is that if you're focusing on pruning your job descriptions and optimizing them in a way that you're pulling out the skills and the credentials that aren't really that necessary, that's also a good way to increase the diversity of your hiring pool, because consistently what we see is people from non-traditional backgrounds or demographic groups, they're less likely to apply for jobs that are calling for everything in the kitchen sink. That means you're only going to get the people who are the traditional hires. And if you want to increase diversity, then trying to pull back your job descriptions and only focus on the most important skill sets makes it more likely you're going to get those people to apply who might not be coming from your traditional background. And it can be a good way to increase the diversity of your cybersecurity team as well.
Okay, good. Just last question, and we kind of open up the space for some questions, and then we kind of wrap it up. So how do you close the loop on that? Like, let's say your system in tailoring a certain job description, do you go back to the company and measure the success of that individual? And then you mentioned that the whole employee retention. I think that's a big problem, right? So you hire somebody, for $80,000 job. You train them to do the $100,000 job, and then now they're trained, and lo and behold, there's a job opening in another company, a competitor, and then they jump ship, right? Because now they can make 20% more. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so that's a pretty common pushback. Is companies say, why would I want to train somebody and then have them leave? The potential answer is, well, do you want to not train someone and have them stay? They're probably going to be less effective at their job while they're there. And we actually have not seen much evidence of employees who receive training leaving and going elsewhere. What we often end up seeing more likely to be the case, not just in cybersecurity, but other fields as well, is that the companies that have the most robust internal training infrastructure, what often happens is the best workers who go through that training program often end up staying within that organization because they're being given consistent upward advancement potential. They're usually identified early on through that training process as a high performer, and then they are inserted into a career pathway within the organization that helps them stay and advance their careers at that company as opposed to having to jump ship. And then often the people who are more likely to leave are the ones who don't feel like they're getting as much opportunity at that organization, which it could either be because they're one of the lower performers, or it could be because their organization just hasn't been investing in them. And if a lot of people, what we're seeing is they say, if a company doesn't want to invest in me, then why should I feel invested in them? And so we've really seen, if anything, the opposite, that when a company invests in their employees, they often see stronger retention.
Right. It's like the cliche of hire people for the job they want, not the job they had. So maybe you can open up any questions from the folks here. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Just repeat the question.
Organizations tend to promote the IT guys than they hire cybersecurity person.
So the question was, how many organizations are promoting IT workers versus?
Do you see in your experience that the organizations tend to promote the IT guys to security instead of hire cybersecurity professionals?
I think we do see a fair number of companies that are promoting IT workers rather than just hiring cybersecurity professionals. Although I wouldn't say that organizations are always doing it as much as they want to. They're certainly not as much as the cybersecurity team wants to. Sometimes there are internal barriers imposed by those pesky folks over in HR that specify that you have to go through X, Y, and Z, jump through X, Y, and Z hoops in order to even just move someone to a different role internally. And then sometimes they actually have mandates that you hire people externally. But there are definitely some. We do see companies doing that, however. And so I think that increasingly organizations are realizing that there is a benefit in trying to promote your other IT workers into your cybersecurity teams. And many of the more forward-thinking companies are doing that, but some companies are still having a difficult time, not necessarily getting the cybersecurity team interested in that, but getting the organizational wheels to turn as rapidly as they need to. And so one of the things that some organizations are doing, if they can't build those pipelines as rapidly as they'd want to, is they might find champions across different teams to be the security champion. They'll teach some cybersecurity skills to the development team, to different teams across IT and beyond within the organization, and that's sometimes a happy balance that we're seeing organizations strike. If they can't pull in the talent as rapidly as they'd like to their cybersecurity teams, then they find people within other teams who can start to build cybersecurity teams and be that hub of cybersecurity knowledge embedded within different teams distributed across the organization.
Good.
I know you mentioned the importance of sort of internal L&D programs and internal training programs within companies, and how you think that's generally good practice. I was wondering on the other side of it, does it necessarily improve like a candidate or employee's prospects with the external programs that are available, like some of these cyber security boot camps or trainings and what have you? Do you find that those are viewed favorably by employers for the most part, or is it still not really well received?
Just repeat the question real quick.
Yeah, so the question was whether cybersecurity boot camps and similar shorter-term training credentials and programs are well regarded by employers. And increasingly what we see is that in fields like cybersecurity or other emerging fields, employers, when they have a hard time finding a skill set, they don't really care where somebody developed that skill set. They just want to know that the person has it. So if somebody goes through a program, a boot camp, or a training program that clearly taught them mastery of a particular skill set, then we generally see employers value it. Obviously, there's a difference between, seeing Harvard on your, somebody's resume than, local, cybersecurity boot camp. Although you could probably argue that somebody who went through that boot camp might know more about cybersecurity than somebody who just went to Harvard. But, I think that if employers are seeing that somebody has the skills they're looking for, then increasingly they're saying, we really don't care where you got them. They might place a little bit of additional weight on a place they've already hired people from, but in these fast-moving fields, they just want to know people have those competencies, and if they got them in a boot camp, then and they can demonstrate that they actually have those skills, then employers will value that.
Okay, last question, if anybody has. Go ahead.
What are the best certifications to get if someone has no job experience?
So the question was, what are the best certifications to get if someone has no experience in cybersecurity? I'd say the most common is probably Security Plus. That's kind of entry-level certification from CompTIA, vendor neutral, and it is. I would say it is. Actually, I know it is the most demanded entry-level cybersecurity certification. I think there are usually about 30 to 40,000 job openings every year calling for it. It's obviously not going to get you 120K right off the bat or anything like that, but it isn't a widely requested certification that employers consistently seem to value, and can be a stepping stone to either more certifications or at least an entry-level job within the field. So that's probably the one that I see the most. GIAC also has some entry-level certifications that are worth looking at. They also have a nice pathway up from entry-level to more advanced level certifications. But I would say that out of pretty much all of the entry-level certifications we see, Security Plus and GIAC are the two that employers are consistently demanding the most.
That's it. We're going to be sticking around if you want to just. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We officially endured about an hour and 15 minutes of security talk. Next event is March 9th, I believe. It's going to be a live podcast recording with David Spark. Welcome to join. It's going to be a great event. So same spot here. Just as soon as you leave, you can sign up. Again, looking forward to seeing you at the bar, and thank you again for coming tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks.